therapy, all human interaction, awareness is not nothing, but it has an enormous healing effect. Because awareness is, by its very nature, brings a spaciousness, and it brings in the unconditional spaciousness around whatever is being experienced. And it's aware, it's receptive. Because it's also receptive, it kind of encourages the expansion of a contraction. Just being aware means the allowance of awareness, being aware around a feeling or a thought, allows it to expand, which is a healing movement.
Allows what to expand?
To expand.
What is
contraction?
The contraction. Yeah, just missed a word.
Of course, with every expansion, there's simultaneously a contraction happening at the same time, but that's what life is. That's the transformational movement of life. It allows it to move. Movement is transformation. Because it has within it its own intelligence. It knows where it needs to go. That's why we said earlier that when a client suddenly goes into a random story, it's not random, because they could have picked from a million different random stories, but this one comes forward when the contraction is touched. So a lot of our work is just to stay there holding space, to let the logic of it, the method in the madness, reveal itself, which it always does, if we're patient. We don't grasp if we don't push it, if we don't play with it. And if they start to tell a story which appears to be totally a distraction and disconnected, and we say, no, 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 go back to the feeling, then we're interfering.
Always? I mean, because there are some times when I feel that that story, I hear what you're saying, and I maybe even...
I never found that. What I find, so I won't ever say always, but what I find is that they'll start speaking and I stay totally within the same awareness that there was towards the contraction, towards the story, and they'll say, I know I'm distracting, but I really need to tell you this. Or to a certain they become self-aware, also with the story. Or to a certain stage they'll say, I don't know why I'm telling you all of these random things, but I know it's somehow going to come together for you.
But when somebody says that, then that's a different experience for me. When someone is really moving it feels like they're constantly moving away from where we just were, and from the feeling that was already starting to emerge, then sometimes I feel like it's just escaping away.
So again, it's from at least the only way I can share is the way of absolute allowance and radical acceptance. So, but when they start going with a story, I haven't forgotten the whole feeling dimension. I'm not going to glide with them in the mental direction. So they're telling a story, let's say, in that example, about this woman that was controlling and how it annoyed her so much and all of this. It's like, so how did that feel? And then we're going back to a related contraction.
You're still holding that.
And maybe it's a different contraction, the story then. It's like it felt like agony, but it's related to the first one. It's like sailing a boat down a river, and the river is their energy. You follow it. So there is this indisputable fact that we are aware. There is this awareness. For anything to be experienced at all, awareness has to be there. The awareness is there before the experience kicks off, it's there during the experience, and it's there when the experience dies down. The awareness is what we can trust. It's the thing, the continuum. No awareness, no story. No awareness, no experience. So awareness is more a source and a resource than any experience or any story.
Awareness is more of a resource.
A source, at source, and is a resource. Source and space. Space and source.
There was some logic to that name.
It's the name of Gina's business.
Source and space.
So there is awareness and there is happening. The happening of the personality, the happening of life, the happening of creation, the happening of the universe, the happening of Despicable Me. So all of this happening is taking place within awareness. So another way to say that is everything is happening, but I am not the happening. Life is happening, but I am not the happening. The personality is happening, but I am not the personality. And there is this link between the word happening and happiness, because in freedom it's a kind of happiness that's happening. All happening is a result of the interplay between the active and the receptive. So a story begins active, it's initiated, the story being told, and then the story ends, the receptive ending. It's going from A to B.
The ending being the receptive, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Because no story is told without a listener. And when the story is complete, it's offered in a way towards what? Something which is receiving the story. So you can see this with a simple thought. When you have a thought, you begin to think a thought in a sentence in your head. And then it comes to its end. So it's born, it lives, it dies. The birth is kind of active, the death is kind of receptive. It's received back. At the same time that this activity of thinking is happening, we are receiving the thought. It's also working on the horizontal, we're receiving the thought. Or else why would we think? We wouldn't be aware that we were thinking. Awareness is receiving the thinking, the thought. So there's already a split there between the thinker and the one that is the thinker. There's the thought, which is the happening, there's the thinker, and there's the one that's receiving the thought, the one that's listening to the thought, the one that buys into the thought or not buys into the thought.
Isn't that the same as the thinker?
No, there's a split. We tell ourselves stories. So there's a self which is telling and there's a self which is listening. And accepting or not accepting, or resisting or gobbling it up, yummy, yummy. My mother-in-law is a bitch. Yummy, tell me more stories like that. Within the head.
So the thinker, the thought, and the listener of the thought, you could say, the receiver of the thought, yes?
Yeah. So on the level of the mind, there's a center point beyond this active and receptive, which is simply silence. Silencing of the mind. Because all of this active receptive is very reactive. It spins. So when you receive something in, there tends to come an answer of the mind. And then that has to be answered. So one thing leads to another. Action, reaction, action, reaction. So we don't get free of thinking by thinking how to get free of thinking. Thoughts will not solve the problem of thinking.
So you're saying we should still the mind?
So What is the trick? Can you think your way to silence in the mind? Can thought produce silence? If you think hard enough, do you get to silence? It's not. It's a paradigm shift out of the duality of active and receptive to the fertile ground, like awareness of silence. It's just like awareness, out of which all thought appears and to which all thought disappears, which is there all the time, regardless of whether thinking is happening or not. Silence continues, whether there's the happening of thinking or not. In fact, you could even say thinking arises out of the silence of mind and returns to the silence of the mind. The silence is there to be heard even when thinking is happening. It doesn't go away. So again, it's an attitude shift to really, really trust that third point beyond the active and receptive, which is the silence. So this is something we can try when we find ourselves thinking about something, thinking, try just to let go of the thinking business and listen to the silence for a few minutes or a few seconds. Because that's the source, that's the resource of thought. That's a faster way to attune the thoughts than thinking could ever be. It's like Einstein said, we can't solve the problem with the same way of thinking as we created it. And we're, of course, traumatized in silence. We are taught to see silence as a punishment, to be silenced, to shut up. Like the listener is traumatized, the quality of silence is also traumatized. It's seen as an oppression, which means it's gotten, at first there needs to be a kind of purification of the trauma from the quality, because it's a resource. When we touch the infinite source of silence, it's still very, very alive. It's not a dead thing. It's very powerful. And by itself, it brings us into a deeper connection to the feeling vibrations in awareness, which is beneath thought. But these are also happenings. So it's more like weather. The kind of happening now is not getting from A to B in terms of direction, one neural network to another neural network, like traveling. It's more like, oh, it's really stormy here, or it's a very gloomy day. It's more atmospheric. This is without contractions we're talking, just the moods. And that silence will tend to be impregnated with those atmospheres at first. There can be atmospheres of negativity, subtle atmospheres of despair, subtle atmospheres of depression, atmospheres of positivity, of optimism, of expectation, like the moment before dawn. But still, these, in a broader field, these atmospheres are still happenings. It's the weather. It's not who we are.